Back in the early 1970s, the roads of Britain were packed with Minis, Triumphs, and MGBs. But tucked away in Witham, Essex, something different was happening inside a small workshop run by the Walklett brothers, Bob, Ivor, and Trevor. They were not aiming to take over the world. They just wanted to build something quick, light, and enjoyable to drive. That is how the Ginetta G21 was born. A car that hardly anyone remembers today, but one that deserves to be talked about, mostly because it looked like it had borrowed a jacket 2 sizes too big for its skinny frame. And it made it work. The Ginetta G21 was first revealed in 1970. It was not Ginetta's first car, but it was different from the earlier models like the G15. It was bigger, it had a proper fastback coupe shape, and it came with real doors. What a concept. The earliest G21 used a Ford Cortina engine, but by the time it was shown at the 1971 Motor Show, it had switched to a 1.725-liter Sunbeam Rapier engine. This engine came from the Sunbeam Rapier, which itself was a sporty car from the Roots Group. The Ginetta G21 used the Rapier's rear axle too, because why not reuse good parts? It was a 2-door coupe made with a fiberglass body and mounted on a steel backbone chassis. That made it light, only around 1,796 pounds, which meant even with less than 100 horsepower, it could move with purpose. Depending on the model, it came with a 1.6-liter engine, a 1.725-liter engine, or the more powerful 3.0-liter Ford Essex V6 engine. The top-spec version with the 3.0-liter engine made about 129 horsepower at 4,750 revolutions per minute. There were a few different versions. The G21 1600 had the 1.6-liter Sunbeam engine with about 86 horsepower. The G21 1800 used the 1.725-liter engine and made about 99 horsepower. Then there was the G21 3-liter overdrive, which had the Ford Essex V6 engine and a little more kick. In 1974, a slightly updated model called the G21S came out. It still had the 1.725-liter engine, but with better suspension and interior finishes. It made around 99 horsepower, too. By the time production stopped, about 80 to 150 cars had been built, depending on who you ask. The cars were never mass-produced, partly because Ginetta was not a big company, and partly because the oil crisis in the 1970s made people think twice about buying sports cars. The first production G21 was built in July 1973, and full production started that September. It was one of the first models Ginetta decided to sell as fully built cars instead of kits, thanks to new tax rules in the United Kingdom. Prices started around £2,196, which made it the cheapest specialist sports car in the United Kingdom at the time. Driving the Ginetta G21 felt a bit like driving a Lotus Elan, with its soft springs and light weight. It rolled a bit in corners, but the steering was sharp, and the car felt alive. The interior was basic. The glove box could barely hold a sandwich, and the door handles looked like they came from a hardware store. But it worked. The G21 did not become a legend. It did not change the industry. But it did show that 3 brothers in Essex could build something real with their own hands, and that sometimes that is enough. In 1970, something strange showed up at the Tokyo Motor Show. It was long and low, with weird doors that lifted the roof right off your head. People didn't quite know what to think. It looked like a spaceship, but it had a Toyota badge on it. That car was called the Toyota EX7, and it had a story tied to speed, racing, and one very unfortunate test crash. This is the tale of a concept car that came from a race car, and then vanished like it was never meant to be remembered. To understand where the Toyota X and 7 came from, you have to go back to the late 1960s. Toyota had just entered the world of racing with a car called the Toyota 7. The original version, the Type 415S, had a 300 horsepower V8 engine and was built to race under Group 7 rules, races with barely any restrictions. This car soon evolved into the Type 474S, also called the New 7, and eventually into the wildest version, the Type 578A. That last one had a twin turbocharged V8 engine that could pump out over 800 horsepower. Sounds fast? It was, but also dangerous. Toyota worked with Yamaha to build the aluminum tube frame chassis. This was used in both the race car and, later, the EX7. The car had double wishbone suspension, anti-roll bars, and ventilated disc brakes all around. It sat low and tight, with a wheelbase of 88.5 inches. The team also added a 5-speed manual gearbox from Aisin Seiki called the SR55 and a strong racing clutch. But in mid-1970, during testing at the Suzuka circuit, a tragedy happened. Race driver Minoru Kawai lost his life behind the wheel of the 578A. After that, Toyota pulled the plug on the entire racing program. But they still had leftover parts, including a whole chassis. Instead of tossing it, someone had the idea to turn it into a concept car. That is how the EX7 was born. The car was shown in October 1970 at the Tokyo Motor Show. It looked dramatic, with gull-wing style doors that opened by lifting the whole roof backwards. The seats were mounted on rails and rose up 6 inches when the doors opened, which probably made people feel like they were boarding a roller coaster. The rear was tall and blocky, the nose long and flat. The whole car had a look similar to the Mercedes C111. Inside, the Toyota X7 was even stranger. The center console was built into the seats. The passenger side even had a cassette deck built into the bolster. The dashboard had a single pod for the gauges and a 4-spoke steering wheel. Everything was finished in gray and yellow. The EX7 had the same 4.9-liter V8 from the Toyota 7, but without turbochargers. It was tuned down to about 450 horsepower. Still, it was fast. Experts guessed it could hit 60 miles per hour in 5 seconds and had a top speed of around 180 miles per hour. It weighed around 2,200 pounds. Only one EX7 was ever built. Nobody knows exactly where it is today. It might be in a warehouse, or maybe Toyota took it apart. Either way, it was a wild mix of a race car and a dream car. Not very practical, not very safe, but definitely not boring. It all began with a strange-looking sports car that made people stop and ask, "Wait, what is that?" With a wedge shape, gull-wing doors, and a style straight out of a science fiction comic, the SA160 Spider was never just a car. It was a quiet attempt to stand out in a world of Minis and Fords. Few knew it existed. Fewer still know it today. But behind that fiberglass body is a story of small-town ambition, big ideas, and a car company that made exactly 12 of them. Let's dive into the world of a rare car built by people you have probably never heard of. The story starts in England in the early 1970s. A small company named Siva Engineering, later called the Siva Motor Car Company, was formed by 2 men, Neville Trickett and Michael Saunders. They were based first in Dorset, then later moved operations to Aylesbury. Neville Trickett had worked with Marcos before, another British sports car brand, and he brought that design experience to Siva. In 1969, they built a prototype that used a Hillman Imp engine, but the idea did not move forward. The design was not bad, it just did not catch on. But it set the stage for what came next. At the 1971 Racing Car Show, they unveiled the Siva SA160 Spider. It was built on a Volkswagen Beetle floor pan, which means it used the base, suspension, and engine of the Volkswagen Beetle. That made it easier to build and fix, though it also meant you were not going to outrun many Ferraris. The engine was a rear-mounted 1.6-liter flat-4 from Volkswagen. It had about as much horsepower as a lawnmower convention, but it got the job done. The body of the SA160 Spider was made from fiberglass. That kept it lightweight, about 2,200 pounds, and helped with speed. The car sat only around 40 inches tall, which made getting in and out more of a yoga exercise. It had gull-wing doors, which were fun until it rained, and you got soaked getting out. The headlights popped up from the hood like little surprised eyes. Everything about the design shouted, "Look at me," but in a very quiet British way. You could buy a full car, or just a shell, and build the rest yourself. In 1971, a trimmed version cost about 895 British pounds, while the shell alone was 525 pounds. Later, the full version went up to around 1,225 pounds. That was not cheap back then, but it was still less than a new Jaguar. Only 12 S160 Spiders were ever built. One of them ended up in the United States, owned by a man named Robert Tausch. He claims it is the first one ever made. Another big moment for the car came in a small way. It became a Matchbox toy. It was number 41 in the Matchbox Superfast series from 1973 to 1978. For many kids, that was the only SEVA they ever saw. The SEVA S160 Spider never became a big name. It is not in museums, and it did not win races. But it did something most cars never do. It stood out. It was different. It looked like a spaceship built by someone with a Volkswagen engine and a dream. That may not sound like much, but sometimes that is enough to be remembered, even if only 12 ever rolled off the line. In the quiet town of Woodbridge, Suffolk, England, something unusual happened in the late 1960s. A forgotten car brand was born not from a massive factory or a famous engineer, but from the ashes of another failing company. It was not flashy or loud in how it entered the world, but what rolled out of that workshop left a lasting dent in British automotive history. This is the story of the Trident Clipper 5.8, a fast, rare, oddly beautiful grand touring car that almost nobody has heard of. It all started with a man named Trevor Frost. He designed a sleek new car for the company TVR, and it looked promising. Italian coach builder Carrozzeria Fizzore helped bring it to life, and it appeared at the Geneva Motor Show in 1965. It had pop-up headlights and a steel body. People liked it. Orders were placed. But TVR collapsed before production began. In came a man named Bill Last, a TVR dealer who did not want the design to go to waste. He bought the rights and formed a new company called Trident Cars Limited. This new company took over the project and called the first model the Trident Clipper. The early Trident Clipper used the chassis of the Austin Healey 3000, but when Austin Healey stopped making that in 1968, Trident switched to a modified Triumph TR6 chassis. That gave the Clipper a more available suspension system and better ride quality. The first engines in the Clipper were Ford V8S, specifically the 4.7-liter, also known as the 289 cubic inch engine. It produced around 271 horsepower. The Clipper could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5 seconds and had a top speed close to 150 miles per hour. That was very fast for the time, and especially impressive for a small company based out of a quiet town. Later in the early 1970s, when Ford had some supply issues, Trident built a version of the Clipper using a Chrysler 5.6-liter V8 engine. That one had around 300 horsepower and came with a 3-speed automatic transmission. It was not a huge success. Only 1 or maybe 2 of those Chrysler-powered Clippers were ever built. Trident did not only make the Clipper, they also made the Venturer and the Tycoon. The Venturer used a Ford Essex 3.0-liter V6 engine, which had about 138 horsepower. The Tycoon was more experimental and used a Triumph 2.5-liter straight-six engine with fuel injection, producing around 150 horsepower. But the Clipper 5.8 remained the most powerful and best known of the bunch. In total, Trident cars built around 85 cars across all models. That is not a typo. Some sources say the number might be as high as 120, but the Trident Car Club sticks to about 85. Only around 30 were Clippers with the original Ford 289 engines. By the end of the 1970s, the company could not keep up. Costs were rising, oil prices were high, and people were not buying two-door cars with loud V8 engines anymore. Trident faded out quietly. The Clipper had a fiberglass body, independent front suspension, disc brakes on all four wheels, and a relatively plush interior. It had leather seats, electric windows, and a radio. Those things were not common in small British cars at the time. It also looked a little like something James Bond might drive, if James Bond lived in Ipswich and worked weekends at a hardware store. Today, only a couple dozen Trident Clippers are believed to survive. They are rare, and if you see one, it is likely owned by someone who really knows their cars. The value of a good one is around 30 to 40,000 British pounds, or even more if it is fully restored. The Trident Clipper 5.8 was not built by a famous brand or designed in a giant office. It came from a handful of determined people who wanted to keep a good idea alive. It might not be in textbooks or video games, but it had real muscle under the hood and a story worth telling. Even if it sounds like a secret agent's car built in a shed, that is because, well, it kind of was.